compromised agent is infinitely more harmful than a compromised human. We are currently running probably the largest MDR service in the world today. We have 36,000 of our 600,000 customers who are currently MDR subscribers. So one of the biggest problems that we run into is not, does a customer have the right technology?
What made you all make that choice to go public with that? And what's kind of the calculus like a CISO or security leader should be thinking about when it comes to disclosing those kind of situations?
So that was a grueling 5-year experience, and it ruined many Christmases for many people. So it's kind of indelibly etched in my mind.
Do you think having a kind of a dedicated security company at scale remains viable as like hyperscalers, like Microsoft and others kind of move into this space?
That is a complicated question.
Thank you for joining the Resilient Cyber Show. My name is Chris Hughes, and today I'm joined by Joe Levy from Sophos. Joe, thanks for being here.
Hey, Chris, it's great to join you.
Yeah, I'm excited to chat. We've crossed paths on LinkedIn in the comments. It has to be at least for several years at this point. I'm always following like your insights and your perspectives and things like that. But for folks that don't know you, don't know the Sophos team, can you tell us a bit about yourself and the team?
Yeah, you bet. And likewise, I follow you and I always look forward to your posts. So I'm the CEO of Sophos. I've been with Sophos for about 11 years now. I originally joined them as a chief technology officer, a role that I occupied for about the first 8 years with my company, and then transitioned into this role a few years ago. My career has always been in cybersecurity. I've been doing it since before it was called that. So 30-something years building security products, enterprise software development, services background. I've been a practitioner. I've worked for a variety of well-known cybersecurity brands, and this is favorite job of my career.
Yeah, it's actually one of the things I'm going to dive into with you is like the roles that you've had, the transitions you've made from tech to business executive and everything in between. But to get us going, one of the areas I want to touch on with you first is this quote unquote cybersecurity poverty line. Like it's a topic kind of coined or phrase coined by Wendy Nather, and I think many of us have used it at this point. But you put out a striking stat, which was roughly 359 million businesses globally out there, but only 32,000, have a CISO title, basically, meaning less than 1 in 10,000 organizations have a security strategy leader. For my audience and practitioners, operators, et cetera, like how does that structural gap change how vendors need to build products? Is the industry building for the right customer? Or I ask that because I feel like it's like the haves and have-nots, right? Like all the venture-backed startups are building for, the enterprise, large Fortune 500, Fortune 100 customers. They have the bigger budgets, they have the teams, et cetera. How do you think about that landscape and like what that means for the have-nots, I guess you'd say, out there?
Yeah, so I think one of the most important economic framings that cybersecurity ever had introduced to it was when Wendy coined that term, and I frequently cite it, and I always give credit to Wendy for it. So I think it's a very helpful way to think about this. We've really never been able to quantify it before, and I was curious about a quantification of at least a dimension of what is the poverty line. And I think that statistic that you cited, which we worked on in conjunction with Cybersecurity Ventures, 359 million worldwide organizations, 32,000 CISOs or CISO-like operators in the world, fewer than 1 in 10,000. Those are just not good odds. Now, there's more to it than just the poverty line by itself. So this gets combined with other factors that we talk about often in the industry. We talk about the skills gap, and there's a debate going on about whether the statistics that we're using from ISC2 are accurate or not. What I think is important to look at is that there clearly is a leadership skills gap, just based on those CISO numbers that we were talking about. There's also this other dimension, which is classically known as a market for lemons, which means that there is an information asymmetry that exists between buyers and sellers in the market. And unfortunately, that information asymmetry, I think, is recently being made worse by AI-enhanced market for lemons, is a term that maybe we could use to describe that, where it's becoming more and more difficult for buyers to really understand what are the differences between claims of vendor A and vendor B, and how do we go about measuring and validating those claims. So the way that I think this translates into how we build product and services is something that Sophos has been doing since its inception. We're focusing on that vastly underserved segment of the market. We have many customers who are large enterprise customers who are buying our MDR services, our XDR products, our firewall products, email security products. but the vast majority of our 600,000 customers now are operating in the SME and the SMB space. And what I think is unique about that is not the technology itself, because nobody wants to buy a mediocre technology. Nobody says, I want to go buy an SMB product. They say, I want to buy the best product that I possibly can, but I want to be able to actually extract maximum value from that. And the way that I think that happens is one, through accessibility, and two, through predictability of outcomes. So one of the biggest problems that we run into is not, does a customer have the right technology? Vast majority of customers that we work with and organizations in the industry, they have an endpoint, they have a firewall, they have the things that do cybersecurity. The problem that they run into is misconfigurations. They're ignoring alerts that are happening. They don't have it deployed on all of their assets. They don't have a security operations center that actually allows them to respond to the alerts. So often we see an endpoint that's just crying out for help and it's being completely ignored. And ultimately, an adversary is going to succeed if a human doesn't intervene or an agent doesn't intervene on behalf of that asset that's under attack. So what I think is most important in terms of practical translation there is a couple of things. One, we need more focus on secure by default designs, meaning that when a thing is installed, is it going to do the right thing out of the box, or does it take expert configuration and continuous maintenance for it to do its job well? And then the other thing that we need to do is we need to provide better packaging. And this is how we get to better predictable outcomes. And this is where we're seeing the emergence of these hybrids between technologies and services. You create more predictable models with offerings like managed detection and response than you do with extended detection and response.
Yeah, I think that's a great framing. A few things I want to call out there is like the secure by default approach that was championed, previously by CISA and some of the folks over there. Some great publications on that. And it is a great paradigm to think about because you've been in cyber a long time, like I have, and it feels like you get something and it's insecure by default. You have to lock it down. There's DISA, STIGs, right? There's CIS hardening guidelines. And it's like, why are we giving a product that's like inherently insecure, and then you have to go make it secure? And then the other aspect that you were touching on there is kind of the labor, the workforce aspect of it. Like you have. And I've quipped like phrases like we're best practices rich, but implementation poor. Like we have all the best practices, we have all the guidance, we have all the tools. We just don't have the capacity to go and do the things we need to do, which is what you were getting at with the, kind of blurring between product and services and then the managed services angle too. And that also touches on, the SOC and honestly, the AI in the SOC is like one of the most hyped categories of AI applicability for cyber, right? There's a lot of excitement and optimism there, investment there. And you've said that AI and security operations can now, I think a quote you used was at least approximate the intuition of a human analyst. But you've also said that boards are still treating AI as an IT topic, and those that are already behind. So I'm curious from like Sophos, your perspective, where are you seeing genuine operational signal from AI and, managed MDR workflows and such versus where you think the industry is kind of still overselling things?
Right. So those two statements are not mutually exclusive. And I think the latter one, that boards are still treating security as an IT topic, that's just a matter of maturity. And we're seeing rapid changes to compositions of boards, primarily because of AI. But I think cybersecurity is going to be a secondary beneficiary of that. So I think we're going to see a rapid kind of maturation in the way that boards are thinking about the importance of cybersecurity because of AI. So it's kind of a good side effect that we see there. And on the approximation of the intuition, we're absolutely seeing it. We're seeing it in practical terms. I don't think this is hype. I do think it is overhyped, but I don't think it is hype at all. It's very real. So one of the problems that I think we're dealing with in the industry today here is that there are really no conventions for terminology. There are no conventions for metrics when we're talking about what a security operations center does, whether it's a human-driven, AI-driven, or some combination of the two of them. The industry talks in terms of MTTX, mean time to acknowledge, mean time to triage, mean time to investigate, to respond, to remediate. But there is no standard vocabulary that exists in the industry. And that makes it just super confusing for buyers because there are claims out there that we respond in sub-millisecond. Well, what does response actually mean? Does it mean that you're just acknowledging the alert, or does it mean that you've actually contained it and remediated it? And this is where I think the industry would benefit from having that standard vocabulary, but that would also require a willingness of participation from all of the vendors. And sometimes vendors can be intentionally opaque about the way that they talk about this stuff. So I think number one, we need a standard. Number two, we need a kind of bravery from the vendor community to actually support it, even if it might reveal that things aren't as perfect as they might like a market to think. Now, it's important to keep in mind that we are currently running probably the largest MDR service in the world today. We have 36,000 of our 600,000 customers who are currently MDR subscribers. And there is absolutely no way in the world that we could have made this to this level of scale and proficiency if we didn't have an evolution of the automation components. So we started with what we were calling automation, and we incorporated ML pieces, and then we were increasingly referring to the ML as AI. And now we're referring to agents performing different sorts of workflows. And the vast majority of what we would conventionally refer to as like tier one within a SOC, and you can think of tier one as being like triage and false positive management activities. Tier two would be investigation and response activities, and tier three would be the more sophisticated kind of engagements like threat hunting, incident response. The vast majority of tier one and tier two can be performed by agents at this point. It's just a question of how long do we keep a human in the loop? Because at this point, I don't think the AI is advanced enough where anybody would feel comfortable entirely turning over the keys for remediation activities. Like we continue to see events like what happened with AWS and Hero going out of control and disrupting people's lives for a period of time. So we're not quite there, but I'm confident we're going to get there. Between here and there, we have to keep a human in the loop. And really, the whole conversation about can we get to a 100% fully autonomous SOC just raises kind of a philosophical question. If a SOC is 100% automated, is it really a security operations center, or is it just a protection product with a very, very long data pipeline? Because it does kind of become that at some point. I think the accountability element is fundamental to this whole thing, and that is why humans are going to remain in the loop for some period of time, probably for the foreseeable future. And I've gone so far as beginning to refer to humans as the accountability API in an agentic world, where you have to have a human that can be held accountable for this stuff. And I think everybody could probably be reminded of that famous quote from IBM from 1979, computer can never be held accountable, so it should never be allowed to make these kinds of decisions. I think we're past that point. We're going to wrestle with that topic, but I don't think humans are ever going to be completely removed from the equation.
Yeah, I think you raised a great point on human in the loop, but of course, like there's scale and bottleneck challenges there. Human can't review every activity of X number of agents across, however many activities in an hour. And like, so it's kind of like a balancing act of like, what's that, right spot for the organization where they can have that accountability and over the agents, but also relieve some of the human activities to the agents, right? And I'm curious, like you touched on this a little bit, but running one of the largest, or if not the largest MDR in the world, when you look at this landscape, of course, AI is like a double-edged sword. Has the opportunity, as you said, level 2, level 1 activities. It can alleviate for the staff, free them up to do other things, maybe cost savings, maybe higher level, risk management activities, and so on. But there's also the fact that it's enhancing the attackers too. Like the attacker gets a vote, right? So when you all look at this from that perspective, like what are you seeing, or where do you think we're going with, it also helping the attacker, of course, in terms of weaponizing the exploits faster, automated cyber espionage and attacks like that we've seen highlighted from Anthropic and others. Like, how do you think of the attacker side of the coin?
Sure. Well, at the highest level, of course, all technologies are dual use, and anything a good guy can do, a bad guy can do, and there's always going to be some sort of a counteraction that's going to happen in both directions. I like citing other great thought leaders in the industry. So to the previous point about how long does a human remain in the loop, the answer should be as long as necessary. And we don't have a precise answer to that today. I was catching up with Gadi Evron earlier today and agnostic, and he made the point, which I thought was quite interesting, that in 6 to 12 months, humans are no longer going to be reviewing PRs. And I think that's probably a little aggressive. Like maybe that plays itself out over a longer timeline, but it's a similar kind of thinking that needs to be applied to security operations. Like how long will the human actually need to be involved until we get to that level of confidence that we can turn over at least sets of operations to agents to be able to perform? And we're rapidly going in that direction. But in response to your question about the risk and the opportunity of agentic AI, There was a post from Caleb Sema from White Rabbit, the venture capital firm. It was like last week or this week, and he said we've just deployed more attack surface in the past year than we have in the previous decade, and most security teams have no visibility into it, which is true. So that addresses your question about what does it mean in terms of attack surface. And then probably the most interesting subpoint that he made about that was that a compromised agent is infinitely more harmful than a compromised human. And I think that's one of the most important components of doing the risk assessment on this. Like what happens if an agent ends up getting compromised? Have we not just set up the right kinds of guardrails, but is there an underlying infrastructure that can restrict their privileges? And naturally, the industry is beginning to look at enforcements down at the kernel level for this today. And that's very exciting to me because, of course, we have a lot of kernel instrumentation in our endpoint technology. And I think that that's going to be a fundamental component to the way that we broadly solve this problem. So for defenders, and I'm going to give you a very sort of pedestrian answer first. For defenders, agents mean that we have the continuous reduction of those MTTX KPIs that we were talking about before, better service level agreements, service level targets for our customers. And we have an ability to deal with what I think everybody agrees is going to be this inevitable rise of AI-driven attacks at volume. So we're already seeing sparse instances of them today, but I think they are going to become more voluminous. And because of that, that's only going to be managed by AI countering AI. Now, the less pedestrian answer is I think it does create exciting opportunities for us to do new things in markets. So we were talking about the 359 million, 32,000 problem before. I would consider that a 40-year-old market failure where the spending in cybersecurity just goes up every year, but the problem doesn't seem to be getting any better. And I think we do have an opportunity to fix a market failure now. And the way that we're thinking about that is with a recent announcement that we made a program called CISO Advantage. And this is going to be doing what we were just talking about earlier, taking the intuitions of a very skilled cybersecurity leader and making them available to the hundreds of millions of organizations that couldn't even conceive of having a CISO previously. Like, not only do I believe this is possible, we are convicted to it, and we're going to be shipping it this year. So that's where I think agents begin to make a significant difference when it comes to defenders.
Yeah, you touched on quite a bit there, so I'll try to touch on a few things that you covered there. I saw Caleb's post about that. I agree with it. We've kind of democratized development for better or worse, and what's going to come from that, is, of course, is a sprawling attack surface like we've never seen before. And then there's also the rise of what he called zombie tools, where people are starting to kind of think they can just build things themselves rather than buy them. And that comes back to your earlier part of the conversation, where we have plenty of tools. It's implementation, configuration, monitoring, et cetera. Like, that's the gap. So it doesn't solve for that necessarily when you just build things and throw them out there and, don't think about the long tail of sustainment. And I agree with your last piece there about using agents to bring expertise to resources or organizations that are under resourced and don't have the expertise. They could never attract and retain the type of talent that we're talking about. That has a tremendous amount of value. So I'll be keeping an eye out for that too. I wanted to pivot a little bit and ask you a bit about, I guess, a business thing here is, you all had the Pacific Rim disclosure, and I wanted to talk about transparency, because you talked about this a little bit, where you needed collaboration among organizations to be transparent around metrics and things like that. You touched on that earlier, and Sophos had made this bold choice, I think it was in late 2024, to publicly disclose a multi-year engagement with a Chinese nation state actor that was targeting your firewalls, right? And actually, personally, I wanted to comment on this one because I feel like we're seeing more and more security products be targeted because, of course, they're highly privileged. They have visibility across the enterprise. They have sensitive data like vulnerabilities and other things that could be weaponized. But that level of transparency is still rare in the industry. I feel like, especially among security product companies and so on. What made you all make that choice to go public with that? And what's kind of the calculus like a CISO or security leader should be thinking about when it comes to disclosing those kind of situations?
Yeah, so that was a grueling 5-year experience, and it ruined many Christmases for many people. So it's kind of indelibly etched in my mind. The reason I shared it is because I think that sharing that kind of experience, particularly including all of its embarrassments, all of its frustrations, and all of the risks and risk decisions that we needed to make along the way, is probably the highest form of threat intelligence sharing that we could perform. And naturally, we're participating in a lot of threat intelligence forum. This is kind of like a sublime form of threat intelligence sharing. That's how I was thinking about it. It was something that we needed to be able to do for the industry. The calculus was a hard one, as you can imagine. There was a cost benefit analysis that underlied the whole thing, and effectively the costs are, what is this going to mean to our reputation? What is this going to mean in terms of making us a target? What is it going to mean in terms of potential legal actions that are going to be taken against us? There was the whole breaking into the hackback domain and that whole conversation. And categorically, I don't consider what we did hacking back. And for those of you not familiar with it, we put some monitoring equipment on our firewall so that we could observe what the adversary was doing during the exploit development. And it initially started with us literally putting our EDR agent on the firewall. Firewall is Linux-based. We took our Linux EDR agent, we put it on the firewall, and then we were able to collect telemetry. That was helpful, but it wasn't sufficient. So then we went further and we created what we called a kernel implant. And this was targeted to the small number of devices that we knew that the adversary was using to create the exploit. So this was not wide-scale surveillance that we pushed out to every single one of our 700,000 firewalls. This was targeted on fewer than a handful of devices. And that gave us the kind of insight into what was happening that enabled us to stay one step ahead of the attacker. And effectively, as we were observing the attacker developing an exploit, we were able to bundle up the set of fixes and then push them out through our hotfix mechanism. And we concealed them in a whole bunch of other fixes so that the attacker wouldn't observe that we fixed the one exploit that they were developing. We fixed 150 things at the same time, and that happened to be one of them. So that was one of the primary elements of this that permitted us to get the upper hand in that engagement. Now, we obviously spent a lot of time talking with our product teams, with our internal legal teams. We also worked with outside counsel on this. And I have to call out Evan Wolf, who is now at Aiken, and at the time he was at Kroll and Mooring. And he was just a wonderful partner to work with on us on this project. We pushed each other quite a bit to be able to do the things that we did. And eventually, we were quite happy with the outcome because it permitted us to protect hundreds of thousands of our firewall customers and eventually to get the upper hand in that engagement. And for those of you who are interested, we are going to be doing a session of this at RSA. It's called Hackback is a Distraction, and Scaling Active Cyber Defense is actually what we're going to be focusing on. And that's going to be on Monday morning at RSA in a couple of weeks.
Awesome. I might try to check that out myself. I think I may be able to make it actually if I think of my schedule in my head. But I love the story about the kind of blending in the update among hundreds of other updates. It's a little bit of cat and mouse, gamesmanship going on from the defensive perspective there. I want to stick on the the business side a little bit. Obviously Sophos. There's the SecureWorks acquisition and integration. $859 million acquisition of SecureWorks. It gave you guys advisory capabilities and enterprise reach, and expanded capabilities and so on. Being over a year plus in on that, I'm curious, because we often don't get a peek behind the curtain from the outside in. Like you kind of just hear about things and you don't really know how they went, or you don't learn about it till years later, maybe, or directly interfacing with a firm. I'm curious, when it comes to that expected integration in terms of technical, culturally, commercially, et cetera. What would you tell another CEO when it comes to that that process and that experience that maybe the due diligence process doesn't necessarily prepare you for?
Yeah, so this is the biggest acquisition that Sophos has ever done, the biggest one that I've ever led. The first time I've taken another public company private. So there were a lot of firsts here. Where I'll start is I'll say we began with a perfect cultural alignment. And like when I say perfect, I mean absolutely perfect. Like it couldn't have possibly been any better. And I've made this point before, but I'll say it again because I think it's important. Cultural fit doesn't guarantee success, but a lack of cultural fit will almost certainly guarantee failure. So be mindful of that as you're starting. When we started the integration process, we always begin with a first do no harm principle. And we began communicating with the SecureWorks customers to let them know, you picked SecureWorks because you love them. We're not going to break the things that you love. We sell a whole bunch of products that you've probably already got in your existing operation. We're not going to apply pressure to you to replace your endpoint or replace your firewall or replace your email security solution. We're going to let you operate we're going to build confidence in us, and we're going to demonstrate to you that we can actually do the job as well, if not better, than SecureWorks had been doing for you prior to the acquisition. And once you get to that level of confidence, then we're going to let you know about some consolidation opportunities that exist. And customers appreciated that. Many of them are now exploring the rest of our portfolio and thinking about what that vendor consolidation could look like for them. So that was part of the business thesis, and we're actually seeing that play out quite well right now. So what was harder than expected? I'll get to that. So and maybe this has more to do with my technology background than anything else, but the technology integration was relatively straightforward. Like understanding how do you bring these two platforms together and get them integrated and playing nicely, operating more efficiently, get cost synergies, that kind of thing. That was relatively easy for us to define and then execute on, and we're doing great on the integration roadmap. The next most difficult thing was the service integration, because there are two discrete MDR services, and now you have to figure out how do we converge them into one set of practices within a combined security operations center. We have the design, and we're making progress on that right now. We expect to get to convergence by the end of this calendar year. So that one is also going according to plan. Probably the most difficult part had nothing to do with the technology or the service, but it was on the go-to-market side of things. And the reason why that was complex was because we were beginning with two pretty different models. So Sophos is 100% channel, and SecureWorks was historically 100% direct, but they were beginning their channel journey. They were about 30% of the way through there. So you've got two different go-to-market models, channel and direct, that you need to converge. Then there was also servicing different segments in the market. Sophos historically, SMB and mid-market, some number of enterprise customers, SecureWorks entirely enterprise customers. So then figuring out how you harmonize the segmentation differences. Those are all solvable problems. They just take time. And we're still going through that right now. We do have a unified go-to-market force. The go-to-market operating systems are all combined. Like the back end is all done. Now it's just a matter of getting the interfacing with the customers and the interfacing with the partners completely unified. And we're going to have that complete unification done this year, when our new fiscal starts, in fact, which is just a few weeks away. But that, I would say, was probably the most complicated part of it. And then the advice that I would give about what doesn't show up in diligence, assuming a well-populated data room and sufficient time to do the diligence, so caveat on that one. What I would say doesn't show up is workflows, time and motion studies, like understanding how businesses actually operate. Like, what does the interior machine look like? That's the kind of thing that you don't begin to discover until you get to the other side of it. And then depending on the nature of the acquisition itself, sometimes you're dealing with like gun jumping laws, HSR, Hart-Scott-Rodino, that prevent you from actually doing any kind of collaboration while you're going through the diligence process. And you have to wait until the transaction actually closes before you could begin that level of engagement. So doesn't apply to all deals, obviously, but the part that does apply to all deals is just understanding the interior machinery and like how do the gears actually turn and how does work get done inside of that business.
Yeah, it's a great point, because I think there's so much focus on the technology or the services or the external facing customer activities, not the inner workings of the business. Like just it goes back to your comment about culture, like the way things get done, the way communication happens, all those things. Take time to kind of integrate and consolidate into one cohesive way of doing things moving forward. And also that's interesting about, being prohibited from doing certain activities right while the acquisition is underway. Everyone's eager, I'm sure, to get going, but you're kind of limited in being able to do so as well. You talked about the channel there and the business side of things. I wanted to stop on that one and ask a question. You've called MSPs in the past, the most important operators in the cybersecurity ecosystem. And you said your mission is to help scale them into a global security army. But MSPs, of course, themselves are also increasingly targeted, being used as pivot points, to get into the customers or other environments. How do you think about securing the MSP channel itself, and like what responsibility does Sophos take on for those type of activities?
Yeah, that's becoming a more and more important topic now. There's some number of hundreds of thousands of MSPs in operation around the world. Sophos works with about 7,000 MSPs globally, and they do more than half of our business. So when I say they're our most important partners, it's because they're our most productive partners. They're our most enterprising partners. They're the ones who are leading the charge at like the modernization and the transformation of their businesses. So this is why I love working with them. They're also really, really hands-on with their customers. They love to engage. They love to provide consultative types of services, and they're always looking at ways that they can climb the food chain of value for their customers. So this is why I like them so much. The problems that you're referring to, we've seen a number of examples of them over the years. MSPs themselves can be breached, and you could think like a typical MSP is probably going to have 200 customers maybe. And if the MSP themselves are breached and the MSP operating platforms, PSA, RMM, MDM, if those are compromised, the attacker doesn't just get access to the MDR or the MSP provider themselves, they get access to all of their customers. So they can effectively breach 200 customers all at once. Massive amplification attack. Recently, in the news this week, in fact, we heard about the Stryker breach at the hands of the Iranian hacktivist Handala. And this wasn't an MSP. This was a medical supply company, but they used the Intune MDM platform to just wipe out all the devices. So like two levels you need to think about: breach of the MSP and then breach of the tools that the MSPs are using. So all of our MSPs, the vast majority of them, they're our MDR customers. So they're protecting themselves by using our MDR service. And many of them have adopted this policy now where when they onboard a customer, they turn MDR on by default. So rather than making it optional and something that they can go try to sell them, they say, if you want us to protect you, if you want us to be your MSP, this is the stack that we use. And an essential ingredient of that stack is Sophos MDR. So these are business models. Like this is how you define a business model that helps to make customers more secure. And I love our enterprising MSPs who do that sort of thing. Now, the harder part here is securing the hosted systems, securing the supply chains that we're all subject to. So you can harden the shell around the MSP itself. You can harden the shell around the MDM and the PSA and the RMM tooling. But then it's all of the other components that an MSP is using, because these tend to be small businesses, like maybe they have 10 to 200 employees, not counting the massive MSP aggregators like the Lyras, who are one of our best partners. And they themselves, they don't have the best, most mature vendor onboarding practices. So like understanding who it is that they've brought into their environment to run their business and what kind of third-party risk that exposes them to. This just explodes into what I've been referring to as an nth party risk problem. And that one's a really hard one to get your arms around.
Yeah, I'm laughing because I wrote a book a couple years back on software supply chain security, and it's complex, right? Like open source and transitive dependencies and all these kind of things. But when you think about the organizational side, as you said with MSPs, it's like that turtles all the way down kind of scenario, but on the organizational side too. I want to ask you a question on the personal side a little bit. You know, you made the transition from CTO to CEO, and you know, there's other technical leaders that have or are looking to make those kind of transitions. I'm curious, you know, you've talked about, like, for example, emotional regulation being an unexpected challenge. You know, for security practitioners trying to turn business executive or leader, or they're being asked to say, you know, act more like a business executive or speak the language of the business. What are the biggest mistakes you see folks making when they're technically deep, but they're trying to move into business leadership type roles?
Yeah, so the obvious one, of course, is let go of jargon. We tend to overuse jargon in our industry, and the more that you can eliminate its use or at least contain its use, the more you're going to be perceived as someone who's not hiding behind the complicated terms. The most difficult part, other than the emotional regulation, which maybe I should write a book about someday, is how difficult it is to let go of the old job, because you come from the background of being a technologist. Like if you're going from the CTO to the CEO role, for example, you moved through your career to ascend to the top technical spot in your company, and it's what you do, and it's part of your character and your identity and what you love. So letting go of that stuff is really hard, and that means like letting go of the mental cycles that you would spend on the things that a CTO does. It means changing your vocabulary and the way that you talk to the rest of the business and the way that you talk to the board. And it also means changing the activities, what you do every day. And I have to admit, it has never been more tempting to just get back into technical work. And it's because of this Cambrian explosion of amazingness that we have going on with AI right now doesn't mean that I don't do anything. It just means that I can't do it full time. I have a different full time job. And I'm often reminded by my current CTO, John Peterson, whenever I get too in the weeds on this stuff, he reminds me, we need you to be the CEO. And that's a great reminder, and it kind of snaps me back to reality, and then I go focus on the things that I have to focus on. But that's it. That's fundamentally it. It's not just that we have old habits or that we like to indulge our interests in the things that we love, but it kind of becomes a security blanket. And you can very easily retreat back to what you have done for 10 years or 20 years, and it makes it difficult to keep yourself focused on your new job and your new set of obligations to your company.
Yeah, I want to ask a follow-up question on that actually, because like I love everything you said there about not speaking in jargon and kind of fully embracing and stepping into the role and acting in the capacity of the role that you're taking on. But I always wonder how people who take the role like you have now, for example, like how they maintain a solid technical foundation, at least decent enough, right, to have productive conversations with their peers or understand the customer constraints from the technological side. Like you still need to have a foundation of some level, and the technology changes, especially now it's changing rapidly. Like, what does that look like for you of trying to, stay technical enough, I guess you'd call it?
That one's pretty easy. Never stop reading and never stop doing. Just keep playing with the stuff that's coming out. Like whatever company you work for, always make sure you're using your products. Like in all of my teams throughout my career, I've always told them, you must use our product. This is not optional, whether it's product management team or development team, sales organization, SEs, it's like mandatory. Use the thing you're building and selling to customers. Otherwise, how else can you understand the experience? So that's part one. And then there's just so much happening in the industry right now, like listening to good instructive podcasts like Chris Hughes and just reading the literature that's being published. It's great to read and learn. The pace of change is greater than I've ever seen before. Like it is virtually impossible to keep up with the rate of advancement that is happening right now. So you have to accept that you're not going to be 100% aware of everything that's happening, but do a fair sampling and then play with the stuff. Like actually use it. Go build something. Like building is the most important thing. And one of the most transformative journeys that I think companies are going through right now is figuring out, how do we get all of the employees in the company? And I mean all of the employees, like in every single function. How do we get them from being users to being builders? And that's going to be like a 5-year journey that the planet goes through as we go through this evolution of this AI transformation that we're all about to face.
Yeah, a couple of things I want to highlight there is I think it was Dan from Trailer Bits. You talked about this transition, right, to adopting and embracing this technology. He had given a talk at Unprompted because you brought up Gadi Evron in the beginning there of transitioning Trailer Bits to like an AI native company. And it was a really awesome talk. I recommend folks go check that out. And then just using the technology, whether it's the product you're selling or the technologies you're trying to keep up with, like is critical. And then I love the aspect of like just admitting that you're never going to know it all. And I've, in the early stages of my career, like I felt really intimidated by that, personally, like I need to know it all. I feel like an imposter if I don't. And now I felt overwhelmed, and now I'm like kind of excited. Like there's so much to learn. I'll never learn it all. There's so much to learn about and kind of become more familiar with and more experienced in. And it could be exciting as much as it can be intimidating. At least that's how I try to frame it in my mind. So maybe the last question for you here, like, I guess we'll call this the Sophos endgame. What does success look like? Sophos, of course, is a Tom Bravo backed, organization. You guys just completed the Maker acquisition we talked about there, crossing $1 billion in revenue. And it's the largest, one of, if not the largest MDR providers in the world. And you've been candid that, PE has a 3 to 6 year exit horizon. Like, what does the next chapter for Sophos look like? And do you think having a kind of a dedicated security company at scale remains viable as like hyperscalers, like Microsoft and others kind of move into this space?
That is a complicated question. Well, first, let me say on Dan Guido's talk from the Unprompted conference, I actually sent that to my executive team and I said, watch this. So like, I think that was one of the best talks that I've seen that actually makes transformation actionable for a company. So like for anyone listening to this, couldn't recommend it more highly. If you were at Unprompted, awesome. Hopefully you caught all the content. If you haven't, most of it is up at this point. And then Rob Lee set up a Notebook LM that you could just go chat with it also. So yeah, incredible resource to the industry. All right, so to the question. So let me start with competing with hyperscalers. So Microsoft has somewhere between a 20 and a $30 billion cybersecurity business today. They're, obviously one of the largest cybersecurity players out there. I've said this before that any company that engages in a zero-sum game with Microsoft is probably not going to come out triumphant on the other side. So I think that is a poor business model where it is literally in order for me to win, Microsoft must lose. Instead, what we've done for a number of years now is we offer MDR for Microsoft, meaning that we know that Microsoft makes great technology. They have an incredible stack. They also have one of the most compelling licensing models in the entire world. We used to think of E5 as the pinnacle of an entitlement for a subscription to software that will do everything for my business. And now we have E7, so it's just gotten better. And what we do is we provide the MDR overlay to customers who have not just E5 or E7, but maybe they're using Business Premium, or maybe they're just using some lower cost licensing option that Microsoft has. We think that just because they're not paying for an E5 or an E7 license, it doesn't mean that they should have an inferior cybersecurity outcome. So we've built the tooling and the proprietary detections using Graph Security API v2 to be able to provide them the same kind of experience that they would get if they had an E5 license, for example. So that's an example of not competing with the hyperscalers, but making the hyperscalers better. And I think that that's the right business model. Will cybersecurity continue as a standalone industry? Without a doubt. Like it's inconceivable that as an industry it could ever go away because of just one of the topics we were talking about earlier, and that is agentic sprawl and what it's actually going to mean for companies. So if anything, as AI adoption begins to accelerate, and this transformation is going to take a decade to actually roll through the whole planet, some obviously moving much faster than others. But as that's happening, I think the demand and the need for cybersecurity is only going to become greater. On the topic of private equity is evolving at the same time too. So there are a few evolutionary forces driving private equity changes. One is the price of money. Debt has become more expensive, and that has fundamentally changed the way that private equity operates. And because of what's going on with the SaaS apocalypse and the approximately $2 trillion of market value that was wiped out in public markets that private companies were sheltered from, that is also going to affect the way that valuations are calculated. I think the market is going through an overreaction on that now, and I think it's going to normalize over time. One of the fallacies that I think is driving this right now is that AI is going to destroy software, and it ignores the fact that AI is software. And if you believe that AI is going to destroy every software company, then it begins to eat its own tail, because the next AI thing will eat the prior AI thing, and the next AI thing will eat that, and so on and so on. So at some point, I think there is going to be an equalization in the thinking and an equalization in the valuations. And then timelines. So we're 6 years with Thoma Bravo. As I stated publicly before, this is actually my third time working with Thoma Bravo. I love them. I think they're the best operator in the industry when it comes to private equity. And there are things that companies can probably only do under private ownership that just become much more difficult under public ownership. And this is exactly what they are designed to do. They're the most efficient at it in the world. And we're approaching maturity in our time with them. So next stage in the life cycle is probably going to be some sort of a transaction. What I won't make predictions on is when that will happen or how that will happen. So the timing depends entirely on when somebody sees sufficient value in us to buy us, or potentially when we see a good, healthy reopening of public markets, and IPO could be a potential next step for us. But I'm not gazing into a crystal ball on this. I'm just focusing on running the best cybersecurity company we can.
Love it. Yeah, I didn't expect a explicit answer when I threw that one out there. I just was curious your perspective, and I'm not even going to try to recap everything you just touched on there, from the market overreaction to everything in between. So many great perspectives. I agree with so much of it. It's funny you said like the AI is software. That's a quote from Rob Vanderveer in an episode I did with him like 3 years ago at this point, from OWASP, and like everyone is treating it uniquely when really it is software basically. Joe, I just want to say personally, thank you so much for coming on here. Like I've always enjoyed your perspectives on LinkedIn, and honestly, it's not every day that someone of your caliber that's running an organization of your size and scale and scope is interfacing with us in the community on LinkedIn. So I really am selfishly appreciative of that, and thanks so much for coming on and chatting with me.
You bet, Chris. I've really been looking forward to this, and I'm glad we did it.
Absolutely, take care.
Okay.